Hi, Michael.
Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing?
Good. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, there's a little bit of like a air conditioner noise. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, is that
Yes,
this?
that might just be we're in our little cafe and we're sitting next to the fridge, so I think there's just like a condenser. Maybe
I
the
track.
microphones are too sensitive, our fancy new microphones. But thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited that you could carve out a little bit of your impressively busy schedule and chat with us a little bit tonight about Universal Monsters Frankenstein.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for reading Universal Frankenstein for your book club. It sounds like it was a fun week.
Yeah. Do you mind starting by sharing a little bit more about yourself and your journey into comics?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing this for close to 15 years professionally now. My first book was an Image comic book called Come Back. It was a sci-fi thriller, um, very street level, very post-noir feeling. And then I actually had a run on X-Files in 2014, I think it was. And X-Files season 10 was my book after that. And then I was at Marvel for a long time. I was doing Marvel Comics for almost 10 years. And then I kind of got a little bit jaded on superheroes and on work for hire. So I decided to step away from that side of the industry. And I did my own creator owned book called Silver Coin, which was a horror anthology book. And I took a break when I had a baby. And I took some time off. And then when I came back to work after that, I wanted to stay in the horror realm. And I had done a short story for Creepshow. And the editor on Creepshow is Alex Antone, and he is the editor, the mastermind behind the casting of all of the Universal Monsters books. And he said, I loved working with you on Creepshow. We've got these Universal Monsters books coming up. Are there any of them that you might be interested in writing and drawing? And Frankenstein immediately stood out to me. I'm a huge fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the original novel. It's like in my top 10 novels of all time. And I do love the original film as well. So I thought it would be a fun exercise to see if I can bring some of the thematic depth from the original novel into the film, which is a beautifully shot, gorgeous film. Every scene is a painting, but I think there's a bit of a lack of depth of character in that film, and I think that's also just part of the way that films were made in that time. It's a product of its time. It's a quick hour and a half movie. It's even less than an hour and a half if I remember correctly. So I just wanted to bring some of the depth of Mary Shelley's book into the film world.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that's like, trying to add sort of your voice to such a long-running, well-known, well-established story?
Yeah, I think if I had done this book a little bit earlier in my career, it would have been more intimidating. But I had just spent 10 years at Marvel doing every superhero under the sun. I had drawn Avengers and Spider-Man and Captain America and the X-Men. And I even, I spent about a year on doing an adaptation of The Last Jedi for Marvel. That was one of my later projects there. So I was coming into this with the experience of what it's like working with licensors, working on really well-loved properties that have a built-in fan base that have expectations. But with Frankenstein, I felt like I wanted to be very reverential of the film and the way that it was shot and all of the iconic scenes in it. But very quickly, I realized that Universal, who was the licensor on it, was actually really super on board with my idea for how I wanted to tell this story, how I wanted to do something that was taking place between the scenes of the film in a lot of it, and introducing new characters and getting a little bit more gory and having a little bit more body horror than the original film has. But I wasn't really too intimidated with this project. I think I came into it with a lot of excitement and a lot of ideas, and those were able to flourish under the guidance of Skybound and Universal, and they really got behind me, and I felt a lot of support. So I was never really too nervous or intimidated by this one. I mean, I've had projects before with licensors where it's been tough, and actors didn't love the way that I drew their likeness. They thought they looked too old, or and the more notes like that come back that seem sort of inconsequential to you as the artist and storyteller, the less invested in the project you become. But with Universal Monsters, it just didn't feel that way. It just felt like the whole time that all the parties were kind of behind my vision, and I had their endorsement. So it was really like I just had the creative juices flowing, and I didn't get too much pushback on any of my ideas.
Speaking of, adding new characters, I really enjoyed the little boy that was in there, and the kind of, we were talking about how he really humanized the monster. Through his perspective. I was wondering what gave you the idea to add him into the story.
That's a great question. He was actually one of the first things that I conceived of when I took the project, because in my mind, everyone kind of knows what happens in the Frankenstein story. They know the big beats. They know that there's a big fire at the end, and that, Dr. Frankenstein creates the monster out of a bunch of body parts. And they know kind of where that movie ends up, because it's just like the windmill on fire is such an iconic set piece in old horror films. So my big thing that I wanted to do with Paul was introduce a character that no one had any expectations for, so that there was the feeling that there was stakes in this story, that anything could happen to Paul at any minute, and there would be no expectation that he would live or die, or whether he would, what his pursuits would be throughout the story. So right off the hop of getting this project, the first thing I said was, like, I'd like a new viewpoint character. I'd like to experience this story from another perspective. And like I said, I had just had a son. So I was thinking a lot about father-son relationships. I was thinking a lot about my relationship with my son, and what, he would experience if I was gone, and my relationship with my own father. He is a blue collar guy. And like, I tried to bring in a lot of honesty in the writing of that character. And it just, like, at the time, it was something that was on my mind. And for me, I find that my writing connects best with people when I'm writing something like topical for me, that I've been thinking about, that's like from the heart. And because that was such a topical subject for me, I figured that I would have a bit of commentary on what kind of relationships look like between fathers and sons, and talk a little bit about grief. So like I said, my dad, blue collar guy, he always had like super rough hands, and it was something that I always remembered about when I was a little kid. Like, I knew his hands because they were so rough and calloused and worn. And so that was something, like, those little snippets of memories were coming back to me as I had my son, and I wanted to bring them into the story to make it feel honest and lived in and genuine. And so, yeah, I think, and then there was also the idea that I wanted to bring in a younger perspective like Paul, because I thought, like you said, that it would really humanize the monster, and play up the innocence of the monster, which I think, in the original novel, the monster is really hyper intelligent, and by the end of the story, he's manipulating people behind the scenes, and he's framing Dr. Frankenstein for murder, and there's a lot going on there. But one of the things that I love about the original 1931 film is that the monster is so innocent, and he's this blank slate that is just, has no concept of morality or death or life or anything. He's just, like, kind of moving through the scenes looking for beauty and meaning. And I thought that it would be a really interesting idea to mirror the monster's arc with the arc of Paul from the story, where they're both kind of looking and searching for something in the absence of a father figure, I guess, right? Because the monsters, in my mind, maybe hoping for Dr. Frankenstein to become more of a father figure, more of an influential piece of the monster's life, but he just abandons the monster. And I feel like Paul and the monster both feel some abandonment, whether the monster understands that or it's subconscious or not. But I felt like Paul would be a really interesting way to be able to see the monster through a completely new lens, and then be able to feel for the monster in a way that we maybe haven't before. And I think in feeling for the monster, and in recognizing the innocence of the monster and the way that, you know, circumstantially he was put in this situation and it's not really the monster's fault. I think that really paints Dr. Frankenstein as a more cruel, heartless character. And my intent was always to have Dr. Frankenstein feel more like the villain. And, you know, with Fritz as kind of like a side villain in the second issue. But I wanted it to feel more like the boy was just as scared as the doctor as he was as the monster, if not more so.
I feel like there's a great opportunity for a Michael Walsh and Jeff Lemire talk about dads in comics panel. That's like the dream.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff's one of my best buds and a huge influence on my work. So maybe we'll collaborate on a dad book one day.
Yeah, I'm gonna hard pitch that. I don't know where Wes went, but that would have made him really happy. We have a resident like #1 Jeff Lemire fan. Yeah, they hung out at a bar at San Diego Comic-Con, so Wes now introduces himself as Jeff Lemire's best friend, so there's some slight competition, obviously.
Okay, I'll say I'm second best then.
Other folks have questions? Speaking of your friends, I guess, we did Dracula, the Universal Monsters Dracula, for an earlier book club, and I know you have a close relationship with James. When you guys both were working on, did you get to like bounce off each other around? One of you was doing Dracula, one was doing Frankenstein. What did that look like?
So James was actually the first one booked for the Universal Monster stuff. When I came on to do Frankenstein, he was already done Dracula. So we weren't really writing simultaneously, but I was checking in with him a little bit and asking him about how the process was with Universal. I just like, not necessarily on the creative side of things was I checking in with James, but more on the business side, honestly, because sometimes it's good to go into new business and new working relationships with your eyes open a little bit. And so we talked a little bit more about the licensors and working on something more in depth with Alex, because I'd only done the short and the one issue thing with Creepshow. So we were kind of touching base more on that stuff than on the creative end. But I do adore what he did in Dracula. I would maybe have snapped up Dracula if he didn't take it. But when I came on, Dracula, it was done, and Creature from the Black Lagoon had just started. So those were the two characters that I couldn't do for my Universal Monsters book. But there was, I'm not sure what's been announced yet. So I'm trying not to spoil anything that Skybound has planned in terms of announcements. But there was some books that were being talked about by other creators, but Frankenstein was still available. So he was the first one that I gravitated towards. It was kind of between Frankenstein, The Mummy, and Phantom of the Opera. And I had some ideas for all of them, but I just had to go for Frankenstein because it was my favorite character of the ones that were available. But yeah, so me and James did talk a little bit, but not on the creative end. But me and James have a great relationship. I mean, we're doing a new book together, Exquisite Corpses, which was just announced. So that'll be out next month, and we've been working very hard on that. And I think I was working on Frankenstein when we started talking about Exquisite Corpses and what that story would look like. So all of our conversations during Frankenstein were actually about the book that we're doing together now, not about Dracula or Frankenstein.
Yeah, I definitely want to loop back to Exquisite Corpses because I read the first issue and I'm extremely obsessed with it. But can I ask what you're most proud of from Frankenstein?
Oh, yeah. I am most proud of the first 5 pages and the last 5 pages, because I feel like it's I'm very proud of the first issue. I think it's really hard first issues are really tough to pull people in and to create a sense of excitement and terror and, get people back for an issue 2. And I think that issue 1 just was like really successful. And I don't know. It was just one of those things that serendipitous and the heart that I put into it, just like it landed on the page, I thought. and I really fell in love with the character of Paul and his journey and his arc throughout the book. And so, in those first 5 pages that you get almost all of Paul's story in very few lines. I'm very proud of how that was all turned out. And then in the last issue, I went back and forth on the ending. I had a few different endings. When I pitched it to Universal, the last few pages of the book were different. The way that Paul's journey ended was different. But as I was writing the script, it was kind of like one of those lightning bulb moments where I realized, if I could show him seeing wild horses, it would be a really interesting mirror of the very first pages where his father gifts him the horse toy, and then it's broken and he leaves it at the grave. And I just wanted to show visually like the arc that Paul has gone throughout the book, and his going through his grief and coming to acceptance of the loss of his father and the loss of his childhood, really, and the loss of his innocence. And that's kind of what him seeing the wild horses is supposed to signify. He's having a connection with a new character who's a father that's lost their child, and they're both seeing these wild horses, and there's a form of there's sadness there, but there's also acceptance and a little bit of hope. And I think when that came to me while I was writing that script, it just felt like so right for the character, and it felt like the kind of the breakthrough moment through all of it that made it all work, which kind of wasn't there for me. I was kind of panicking when I was writing that script for the final issue, because it felt like there really needed to be something that would bring the whole thing together, and make it feel like all the issues were pieces of a whole, and all of the arcs were tied together, and the themes. And so I think when I cracked that and then drew that page, it just felt like the perfect bow, the perfect wrapping paper on the whole thing. So I'm really proud of like the beginning and the ending, especially of the book.
Less of a question and more of a comment on piggybacking on that. I actually really loved the ending. It was so sweet, and I liked that Paul was alone at the end and then had somebody, alone at the beginning and then had somebody at the end. And, like when you're grieving, a lot of the times you'll see things that remind you of the person you lost. And so I loved that mirror. And a lot of the times when I'm reading graphic novels, I feel like there should have been more. Like I get to the end and I'm like, wait, that's it? It's like a cliffhanger. And I thought that this was very well wrapped. I was very satisfied at the end. It felt complete,
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to do in 4 issues too. So there was a lot to cram in there. I think issue 3, we tagged on a bunch of extra pages so that we could get in all of the stuff with Elizabeth into 1 issue, and then move on and have the last issue focus more on Paul and the Doctor. But yes, thank you for saying that. Like I said, I'm really proud of that ending, and I'm hoping that people can find their own connection to it, because it is about how we can kind of connect as human beings through grief and be there for each other, even if it's just a hand on somebody's shoulder. Sometimes that's enough,
Do other folks have questions for Michael?
This is more of an art penciling question. So, did Bernie Wrightson's interpretation of Frankenstein influence you on this at all, or is it something you tried to avoid, since that is something that he is quite well known for?
I'm a huge fan of Bernie Wrightson. I especially love his Swamp Thing stuff. But when you're doing this was a monthly comic, so I would have to finish an issue every 5 weeks or so, 5 to 6 weeks. When you are trying to draw that quickly and to try and draw a page a day, you just can't draw like Bernie Wrightson can draw. That man drew in such a wild amount of detail and rendering, and the beautiful brush work and feathering that he did. So I love his Frankenstein stuff. I love his art, but it wasn't really a direct influence on the way that I crafted my story. I think, more than anything, actually, the way that he drew the laboratory, and the way that he drew some of the machinery and and how busy it was and complex, and how many just like random little bibs and bobs there were around the room that gave it life and personality. I think more than anything, I took those ideas and the way he drew Frankenstein's lab almost as if it was a character in its own right. And I think that that's something that I tried to bring into mine as well. Even though I was basing the laboratory on the sets from the film, a lot of the scenes in the comic were, you know, edges of the room or corners of the room that they never showed in the movie because the movie was filmed on sets. So oftentimes, you know, they would only have one corner or like 2/3 of a room built, and then the back would just be open for the camera crew. So I tried to put to place a lot of the story that I was doing in that third of the room that was never built. So I was trying to iterate on the sets that were designed from the film, but I also did want to bring in some of the stuff that we've seen, some of the iconography of Frankenstein's lab. And I think that Bernie Wrightson drew one of the most iconic Dr. Frankenstein's laboratories ever. So you definitely trying to bring some of his ideas in, but I feel like I don't really draw too much like Bernie Wrightson, and I don't render as much as he does. And I think part of that is time-based. Part of that is patience. I don't know if I have the patience to even draw like that. Like, I'm a pretty busy guy. My mind is very busy, and I draw pretty quickly and then kind of want to move on because as just for me, I got to draw with the excitement and where that's bringing me. And when I start to feel a little bit bored of drawing a page, like then I feel like my work starts to suffer. So the way that I draw is very economical for that reason, just because I need to go where the passion takes me in the moment. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Bernie Wrightson. And if you guys haven't read Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein stuff, I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend the Swamp Thing stories as well.
I have a question because I know you mentioned that you did a lot of Marvel. Have you any interest in doing the DC version of Frankenstein? Usually like Frankenstein with shade. I think Grant Morrison may have created that in like the Seven Soldiers of Victory, or like, you know, revamped it or whatever. But that's actually been one of my favorite versions of or modern versions of Frankenstein. Just an interesting character, and so I wasn't sure if that was something you'd ever thought about writing or had any interest in at all.
Well, I just did a Creature Commandos cover for DC. I'm guessing because they said they were fans of Frankenstein, so I did a cover for Creature Commandos. It's all online already. And they asked me about doing some interiors with Frankenstein, but I don't want to become the Frankenstein guy, you know? I think there's something that can happen in comics is once you do something for too long, then you just become known only for that thing. And then any offers in the future become based on that thing and revolve around that thing. I got randomly, I know I'm a horror artist now, but at Marvel for a couple years, I was just doing comedy books. Secret Avengers started off as this like kind of an absurdist spy thriller, but as it went, the comedy elements of the book kind of really came to the forefront. And then after that at Marvel, I did Hank Johnson was a comedy book. The Worst X-Men Ever was a comedy book. And then I did Rocket Raccoon and Groot was a comedy book. So I did like 3, and then Hawkeye kind of had a lot of comedy elements as well. So I did 4 comedy books in a row at Marvel because I kind of became the guy that can do comedy. And it was kind of a learning lesson for me in comics, was like, I don't want to get pigeonholed into not necessarily a genre, but into something that I'm not super into drawing. And I think like the scope of horror in general is large enough. There's so many different subgenres of horror that like, I don't mind being the horror guy right now, but I definitely don't want to be the Frankenstein guy. So I'm staying away from writing or drawing anything else Frankenstein for a little bit, unless, you know, maybe down the road I would do a sequel to my Universal Monsters Frankenstein story. But right now there's no plans in the books for that.
Thank you.
Can you share a little bit about some of your upcoming projects?
Yeah, so like I'd mentioned before, I spent a few years doing Silver Coin. There's 15 issues of it, and it's an anthology-style horror. I draw the whole thing, and I guess you could say that I'm like quarterbacking the whole thing and show running it. So I'm story editing, and then I'm writing the 5th issue of every arc. So I've written 3 issues of Silver Coin, and then I've had a ton of other writers on it. Like Jeff Lemire wrote an issue. I had Chip Zdarsky, James Tynan, Ram V. I've had Pornsack Pichette Shote, Stephanie Phillips, Vita Ayala, Matthew Rosenberg. I've had an incredible group of writers collaborate with me on that. And it's a horror book that kind of jumps subgenres throughout each issue. But that book will be coming back. I've got all the scripts for the next arc of Silver Coin, and I've got issue 20 is drawn because that's the one that I'm writing. And while I was waiting on scripts, I started drawing that and writing that. So that one's done. And issue 16 is in progress. So that'll be coming back either end of this year or early next year. And then I've got my next really big project in terms of scope is Exquisite Corpses, which I co-created with James Tynan, who did Dracula and is also known from Something is Killing the Children and a bunch of his other works. So this new book, Exquisite Corpses, is a 13-issue initial series. So we're dubbing it Exquisite Corpses Season 1 because we've already got plans for Season 2. But the first season is 13 issues, and the idea is that once every 5 years, there is the Exquisite Corpses games. There's 12 of the nastiest serial killers, deadliest serial killers in this world, this fictional world, are dropped into a small town, and they're set in this game where it's like a battle royale. The last person standing wins, and each of the killers represents one of the secret ruling families of America, and whoever the killer is that wins, that family will become essentially the underground ruler of America for the next 5 years. And it's a story that sounds like this big bombastic thing, but it's actually from the point of view of the civilians of this small town. So all of these really dynamic, colorful killers are like the background monsters. They're like Jason in Friday the 13th or Freddy in Nightmare on Elm Street. What we're doing is following the smaller characters as they try and navigate this night of horror that's kind of come out of nowhere to take over this town. And me and James Tynan co-created it. I'm also co-writing it with him. So I'm writing issue 2 and issue 7. And I'm drawing the giant size first issue is 60 pages. And then I'm drawing the last 2 issues in full, issue 12 and 13. And then in every issue, I'm drawing around 8 pages. And then there's another artist that will come in and draw around 20 pages. So they're all big issues. It's this huge project, big scope. And we've been having a blast with it. I developed a card game that's going to come out with simultaneous to the comic. So if you buy the issues of the comic, you'll be getting a card if you buy the polybag version of the comic. And then if you just buy the normal floppy issues, there'll be like one of the killer cards in the back cover that is there'll be like a perforated line that you can cut the card out if you want to. So that's a big part of the game is like, as we were developing the comic, I've been drawing Magic the Gathering cards for the last 5 years. And so I was kind of drawing Magic the Gathering cards while I was talking to James and just thinking this would be so great as a tabletop card game, as like a social strategy, fun werewolf type card game where each player playing gets to play as one of the killers. And as we kept developing the book and the story and the characters, I think subconsciously the idea for the game just kept kind of rolling around in my head. And we ended up testing a preliminary version of the game at one of the early writer summits. And it just went over really well with the Tiny Onion crew and with James. And so we decided to develop the card game as well. So the Exquisite Corpses comic is first issue is coming out May 14th. And then, each issue as it comes out, there will be more reveals and more cards for the card game. And then once the series is fully out, then we'll be releasing a box set for the card game. But if you do want to get in early, buying the issues will get you early cards so that you can play a stripped down version of the game. So I've just been working really hard on that, doing a little bit of film and television stuff because my very first book, Comeback, got picked up for a feature by Sony and partnered with Neon. And Nacho Vigalondo is writing and directing that. He did Time Crimes and Colossal. So we've been kind of going back and forth on that. We've got the script in for that. So I've been working on doing a little bit of stuff behind the scenes on that film a little bit. and then yeah, a bunch of Magic cards, a bunch of covers, and that's kept me very, very busy.
Yes. Yeah, I'm fully obsessed with the first issue of Exquisite Corpses. I have a feeling I'm gonna develop a fear of mascot characters, maybe rabbits especially. But well, my next question, although you may not have time, would be if you've been reading anything lately that you've been enjoying. But
Yeah,
your schedule,
totally.
okay.
No, no, I'm happy to.
Small child and yeah.
No, I always am reading something, whether it's comic books or a new book. Right now, the novel that I'm usually reading like one book and then following like 3 or 4 comics monthly, and then picking up trades as they come out. Right now, I'm reading a book called Between Two Fires, and it's a medieval horror that takes place in France during the war between them and England during plague times. And I don't know if any of you guys are video game players, but it kind of feels like Dark Souls if it was a novel. So it has this kind of gothic horror, really gritty, really dirty, like pretty gory. It's pretty disturbing, pretty cruel to the characters. So it's not, I don't think it's for everyone's taste. Like it would be probably triggering for some people. It's pretty dark, but I think it's an incredibly well-written book. The creatures in it are disgusting and terrifying, and I love it. You can tell that I have a penchant for these things from my books that I write and draw. But I'm really enjoying that book in terms of novels. And then for comic books, I've really been enjoying Batman Year One from Chris Samnee and Mark Waid. I'm a big Batman guy. I'm a big Chris Samnee art fan. I'm a big Mark Waid writer fan. And I just think like the tone is really fun, but it does feel a bit dark in places. And Chris is just drawing like some of the best Batman art I've ever seen. So I'm really enjoying that book. The new Absolute Martian Manhunter was really, really good. I've only read the first issue, but it floored me. I thought it was one of the best first issues I've read in recent memory. Ultra Mega by James Herron has been really fun. I'm picking that up. I'm a huge fan of James's artwork, so like I feel like I buy that book almost just to study the inking page by page. I think it's like one of those books that you could be teaching in art classes. How energetic and how intuitive the inking is and the artwork is, and the way he draws anatomy is so interesting and so unique to the way that his vision is. So James is really just somebody that I really admire, that has so much personality in his work. What else am I reading? I think Ultimate Spider-Man's been really fun. I'm always looking for a good Spider-Man book. I grew up as a kid in the 90s watching the Spider-Man animated series and the X-Men animated series. So I'm always kind of keeping an eye out for cool books with X-Men and Spider-Man and Batman. So I've been digging the Ultimate Spider-Man series from Hickman and Chiquetto. And then I've been actually rereading a bunch of old Daredevil stuff lately because me and my wife want to watch the new Disney show, but we haven't watched the 3rd season of the original Netflix show. So we've been kind of binging Daredevil after our little guy goes down at night to try and catch up. So I've been on a bit of a Daredevil kick. Yeah, but as you can see from my bookshelves, I'm a pretty avid comic book reader. I guess I'm probably too far away for you guys to see my screen, but I've just got shelves and shelves of comics and trade paperbacks and hardcovers behind me kind of lining my walls. And they back me up. They're big influences on everything I do. Oh, this is another book I just picked up that I really liked. Daredevil Cold Day in Hell. It kind of feels like Charles Soule and Steve McNiven's Dark Knight Returns for Daredevil. It's an older Daredevil in almost like a post-apocalyptic New York, and he's lost his powers, but read the book. Cool things happen. The art is incredible in it. And yeah, I've got a few books here beside the shelf that I've been reading. I read this one pretty recently. It was really good. Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, Houses of the Undead. These guys make really, really cool crime neo-noir comics. This one was fun. It was about like a cult and kidnappings and tracking down missing people. It was a cool one. But yeah, I'm a big fan of their works. I think that's, yeah, off the top of my head, that's mostly what I've been reading right now.
Nice, yeah, a couple things. I love it. Well, you certainly don't have to, but do you have any questions for us?
Not really. I mean, I'm just happy that people are connecting with the Frankenstein book and reading it and enjoying it and doing it for book clubs. I'm obviously always very flattered that, people talk about my work. Because sometimes when you're making comic books, it feels like you're just stuck in a cramped little studio space all by yourself, just with your head in your page. And you don't, sometimes you forget that people are actually reading and enjoying these things that you're creating. Like I'm not someone that necessarily really makes, I don't really think about like the audience when I write or draw a book. I don't think, like, I'm just trying to make the best book I can to my own tastes now, and that's a way that I've started working more so since I kind of left the superhero game. So whenever people are connecting with the things that I'm doing, it just feels really nice because I'm just making the comics now that I would want to read as a fan of the medium, and knowing that those are connecting with other people is very gratifying. Yeah, it's great. So I guess just thank you guys for reading the book and hopefully enjoying it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for this work and thank you for your time. And I know we're excited for all the fun things you have to come.
Thanks, guys. And if you read anything of mine in the future, just let me know, and I'm happy to come back and chat some more.
Sweet. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you guys. Have a
Bye.